Hello to our panelists, and hello to everyone viewing this. I hope this all finds you doing well. My name is Erika Lubin, and I'm an Associate Director at the Center for Science and Engineering Partnerships at the California Nanosystems here at UCSB. I also co-direct the Professional Development Series for graduate students and postdocs. And I'm very happy to be moderating this panel today in collaboration with the Center for Bioengineering on a very timely topic. I have with me Professor Siddharth Day from Chemical Engineering, Debra Fagenson from Physics, Kevin Plaxico from Chemistry and Biochemistry, and Beth Pruitt from Mechanical Engineering. And they will be sharing advice for students on working remotely during the COVID-19 pandemic. Tips for staying motivated and productive in research, especially for those who primarily are in experimental fields, keeping on top of courses and program milestones, and for all of us, managing stress. So as faculty in the Center for Bioengineering, would you each briefly introduce yourselves? Sid, I'll let you start.
Hi, I'm Sid Day. I'm an assistant professor in chemical engineering. I started at UCSB in 2017, and our group is, I would say like 60 to 70% experimental work. And so we try and study how variability in the epigenome at a single cell level drives differences in gene expression and different cell fates during the development of mammals. And so in doing that, we develop part of our lab develops a lot of new techniques to make measurements of different epigenetic marks in single cells.
Thank you. Debra?
My name is Debra Fagenson. I'm in the physics department and the biomolecular science and engineering program. And I've been at UCSB since 1998 and have run an experimental group where our focus is on understanding nature's nanotechnology, which is the machines that you find inside of biology, but maybe just macromolecular machinery in general. So our techniques involve a lot of building things like out of DNA, sometimes lipids, sometimes proteins, but mostly nucleic acid structures. And we're trying to figure out engineering design principles for how to make machines at that scale.
Great. Kevin?
I'm Kevin Plaxico. My faculty appointment split between chemistry and the biomolecular science and engineering program. I'm a bioengineering largely these days. About 3/4 of my group's focused on the development of new diagnostic and medical monitoring tools, and the other 1/4 of my group works on more basic questions in molecular biophysics. I've been a professor at UCSB for 22 years now, have graduated 14 or 15 PhD students so far, typically have 4 or 5 students in my group at any one time.
And Beth?
Hi, I'm Beth Pruitt. I'm the director for the Center for Bioengineering and a professor in mechanical engineering and biomolecular science and engineering with a courtesy in molecular cellular developmental biology. And our lab does a lot of work in mechanobiology at the cellular level. So we try to understand how mechanics shapes the response of cells in terms of structure and function. In particular, we look at how cells migrate, differentiate, change their function in response to changing the mechanical environment around them. A lot of our models are around studying heart disease in a dish, so turning stem cells into human heart muscle cells and then looking at how disease mutations or environmental factors change their function. And our lab, very much experimental, so differentiating heart muscle cells takes some time, and then taking measurements and doing a lot of data analysis on the resulting video streams means that we do have some data in the can to analyze, but we also have people who are wishing they had more.
Great. Okay. So thank you for all sharing a little bit about who you are and what you're doing. So with our campus and research labs recently closing, many of our students are thinking about how to maintain progress during these unprecedented circumstances. And so we're hoping that each of you will be able to provide a little bit of insight and advice to this. So let's start off with first 4 questions that I'd like to ask each of you. So Beth, can you start us off? What tips do you have for staying motivated and productive during these days that we find ourselves in?
Well, I think the first tip is to first cut yourself some slack and realize these are exceptional times when everyone is trying to put the pieces back together and figure out a new schedule. But I would say that making that schedule each week and trying to set some realistic goals of what you want to accomplish, maybe making a reading list in terms of things that you could read related to your research would help make forward progress. A lot of journals are now announcing review papers, invitations for review papers for special issues in the fall. So there's something good to do with that. And background reading always becomes, either if not a review paper, it also becomes a chapter in an eventual thesis, which is great. Also, maybe creating an accountability chain. So having a buddy, not just your advisor, but definitely your advisor in terms of setting goals with them on a weekly basis and how you want to move forward. But having that kind of accountability to yourself and to a buddy on what you're going to read or how you're going to discuss and plan your week can be really helpful.
Yeah, and I think following up on sort of having a schedule, one thing that I think can really help is, maybe finishing off that last class that you need to get your PhD degree. Sort of that gives you a fixed schedule that every day, 9 to 10 you have class and you need to do that. So I think that's probably helpful. The other things that can help, especially experimental students, is maybe taking an online programming class, MATLAB or whatever, Python that you've always wanted to. So this is a great time to do that. And the other thing that I think always helps in staying productive is to have, like Beth was saying, a fixed schedule, and that sort of means that trying to make sure that even if you're alone at home, having lunch and dinner at kind of the same time. So, you sort of plan things around that and making sure you stick to a routine.
So I would maybe add that you might be alone at home, but I think it's also important to motivation to make sure you stay connected. So, reaching out and having video chats or just talking on the phone with people that you interact with during your research or other grad students at the same level, just taking the time to tell them what you did that day and what your current challenge is and hear them out can really help with staying motivated. So don't forget that Zoom meetings and stuff can be used very casually.
And I'm just going to reiterate structure and schedule. I've arranged with all of my students to meet with me twice a week, which keeps both them and, importantly, me on my toes and moving forward. Our lives are so disrupted right now. Anything we can do that adds back some structure, I personally am finding very helpful.
Great. I think those are all very sound tips on how to navigate, especially these early days of kind of reconfiguring our professional and personal lives. So thank you for starting off with that question. So moving in, especially students who are getting ready for certain milestones in their programs or taking classes this next quarter, how should students be thinking about studying for, say, qualifying exams or working with study groups and teams for classes, especially when so much of this is, like we've mentioned, going to be done remotely? Sid, do you want to take this one first?
Sure. So, for students who are taking, qualifying exams or candidacy exams, my suggestion would be if you need to study in a group, I think one thing that really helps is clearly planning, a few days in advance, what is it that is going to be discussed in that Zoom meeting, sort of having a plan for what you need to be prepared for going into that meeting. And then sort of, I think that makes the Zoom meeting more productive, especially since it's always harder to do this online than face-to-face. And so that's why I think sort of taking that extra step in planning and making sure that, that meeting is actually productive. Other suggestions I have, so for example, if you need to write a written report, I think it really helps to, again, really plan in advance, maybe have it ready, like say a month before your exam is due. So that gives, everyone has a disrupted schedule now. So it gives your PI time to work through it, and you can go through multiple iterations. And then the same with presentations. If you need to give a presentation, I think it's a good idea to give a presentation early on to your group, because that really, with all the questions you'll get, that'll really tell you what are the things that you need to work on, leading up to your exam in 1 month. So rather than doing it 1 week before the exam, where then you're all stressing out about all the stuff that I need to know, sort of doing it maybe a month in advance.
Yeah, I mean, I think that planning and doing things formally is key to maybe being very efficient. But just because you're not in the same room doesn't mean you can't also sort of be reaching out to people casually. And I guess that's the only thing. I mean, everybody's talking structure, and structure is very helpful. But when you're remote, I think the thing you miss most is chance interactions with people. And so I would say just get better about having a presence, making sure that you are connected and you kind of just reach out to the people who would be your study group when you need a little bit of a reminder that it's time to buckle down again and get off of all the COVID-19 emails.
I'm not going to add much to that. I'm just going to say, use the old aphorism, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. This is definitely a lemon situation, but the upside is it does give us a chance to focus on things like qualifying exams and candidacy exams with relatively few distractions.
Yeah, I agree with everything you guys just said. It's great tips.
I think it is challenging, right? Trying to figure out how to plan for these structured times in someone's program during this quarter, but a really great opportunity. So I like the suggestions to maybe think a bit more about planning for productivity during meetings, and also maintaining that spontaneity, especially when you need help. If you're stuck in something, not waiting too long and just seizing the moment to ask for help. So all really, really good tips that we hopefully will also use moving forward. So the next question, and though this one is really applicable to everyone, it's particularly relevant to those who are doing research largely in experimental labs. So what are ways to make progress in research if you don't have data in hand to analyze? So if you're in the lab, data for how can you still feel like you're making progress and actually make some progress in your research? What advice do you have? And Debra, I'll let you take this one first.
Well, I guess what first pops to my mind is write. In all sorts of aspects of your research, you need to be ready to write it up for a paper, format whatever data you might have into a figure. But if you don't have data, maybe you just make a mock-up of what kind of data you are thinking of having and start thinking about how you're going to communicate it. So this exercise is kind of like planning. And a wise person once said that plans are useless, but planning is essential. So the exercise of going through and making a write-up, even if it's just writing your methods, writing an outline of what you think your results will be, and giving it a logical order and seeing if that communicates well, probably one of the more effective things you can do, even for experiment. So you might end up with snippets of text that work well that you end up using later in a paper or your thesis. But that is productivity. So it is going to be hard, especially if this lasts a long time. But I'd say for the next few weeks, we all probably have some backlog in writing.
Yeah, to reiterate, of course, what Debra said, planning, understand, frame your art, understanding how to justify your work, is spending time on those issues is never wasted. So I've asked my students to come up with draft introductions to papers that they would like to write someday. That is to start thinking through how they're framing what they want to do. And that will help them decide what they should be doing when life returns more to normal.
Yeah, I agree with both of those. Again, coming back to the idea that if there's a method that you plan to use, but you haven't used it extensively, that you can go to these online resources to see how those methods are done and then write up what your protocol is going to be, how you're going to do it step by step. Thinking through, I really like the suggestion of thinking through the data. I know one of my students got so good at crafting mock data and then creating the figures that I was like, wow, I didn't even know you've done all these experiments. But he had just kind of thought through the whole process of how to present the data so well that his mock figures, his cartoons, were very convincing. And so I think it's really good to think about how you're going to create even just a script, something simple to, how are you going to visualize those data when you have them? Because we know what we're going to measure usually in the experiments that we're doing. And thinking through how we're going to communicate that. I really like that suggestion, Debra. And maybe you need to learn some code how to do that. I know my favorite scripting is typically in MATLAB because it's my go-to, but increasingly Python and R are used a lot. And so, I'm intending to watch some tutorials myself just to kind of get a broader framework on what's the right language at the right time. So maybe Sid, what else do you want to add to that?
I think they're great suggestions. I mean, I think the idea of making mock figures is really powerful. I think one of the things, especially for graduate students who are starting off, it really helps with is thinking about what are the controls, So one way you can think about it is like, think like a reviewer. What are the questions that you would ask if you saw that mock data, right? And I think that really helps in sort of planning for your experiments. The other thing I can think of that can help, especially early graduate students earlier in the program, is maybe asking your PIs for, maybe helping them review a paper that they might get. And that can also be really helpful in sort of, thinking through all these things. Yeah, those are sort of the, I think that will, keep you busy and, and still be, productive.
That's great. I think all of those tips and wisdom from those of you who have been doing writing for many, many years and thinking about how to make progress and pivot in research, I think is something that everyone can benefit, and applying these days of maybe having fewer sets of data but more time to think about the data might actually end up being quite beneficial to everyone. So thank you for that advice. So as sort of a wrap-up question, and one that everyone is really in the midst of figuring out and dealing with, what are all of you personally doing to manage your stress these days? We're all in this boat together, and so I'm curious if you can share a little bit about what you're each doing to manage it in your own life. Kevin, why don't you start with that one?
I've been thinking about this at two levels, one a philosophical level and one a much more practical level. At the philosophical level, I keep reminding myself that, this is not unprecedented in the history of our species, but it's the first time it's happened in 100 years. So it's unprecedented for all of us. And there's no playbook. There's no clear best route forward. We've all got to wing it. On the other hand, we've all been through tough times of different sorts before. And so far we've survived them pretty well, pretty good at winging it. So I'm putting my head down and just trying to do the best I can, and trying to remind myself that in general and historically, the best I can do is worked out pretty well. On a more practical note, less philosophical note, for personal care, I've been availing myself of the beautiful outdoors we have here in Santa Barbara. Walks are still considered to be sufficiently socially distancing. I've been hiking every day for the last 10 days. Rain, shine, mud, doesn't matter. It's really been nice to get out. I haven't yet availed myself of the thing that several of my colleagues have suggested, which is learning something new. That is in the next week or two to start some new hobby. I've always wanted to learn Russian. I think it might be time.
That's great.
Beth, we've your next up.
Yeah, also going for a lot of walks, and my dog really appreciates that. Walks are longer and more frequent, but yeah, getting outside is a great thing to do in this area. Cooking a lot, I think something I don't have time for normally, but I'm enjoying having more time to spend on things like that. But yeah, I think it is, again, that idea of, I like the philosophical framing of it, that this is new for all of us, and we just have to try to support each other as best we can. And I think to Debra's point about reaching out and maintaining contact, like don't be shy. And I know our lab set up a regular Zoom, a recurring Zoom time that we can, and a link that can be used anytime, like at lunch or just impromptu for people to call a coffee break. Or I think people were on there Saturday night for midnight snacks, and we had lab happy hour using the link last week. So it's kind of just nice to like find a new routine in that way for social interaction. So, and these fun virtual backgrounds that allow us to be miles above Santa Barbara while we talk to you. Sid, what do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the lab, we've also, like, for example, started doing a lab lunch weekly, so that, you know, we get to see each other a little bit more frequently, you know, and kind of do the kind of things that you would sort of do normally. Personally, I've, you know, having a chance to do a little bit more reading. As an assistant professor, one of the things I miss a lot is analyzing data, you know, coming from a postdoc. So getting more time to do that is actually a lot of fun. Other than that, I love playing board games. So definitely been sort of doing those kind of things. I recently got to know that Netflix also has this option where you can, you know, two people at different places can stream the movie at the same time and watch it together and sort of chat on the side and stuff like that. So, you know, that's something that you could try out. Yeah, and sort of going out for walks and things like that. That's really, you know, helpful and sort of, you know, de-stresses you. Yeah.
So you guys have shared a lot of good tips. So I'm not going to repeat those, but I do agree that walks and socializing is important. I'd say two things I find helpful. One is making a to-do list. Somehow just getting out of my mind all the different things that I have to do. I've started putting them on old business cards and just sort of writing on the back and having little things I can arrange. Because if it's out of my mind, but it's written down somewhere, I know I won't forget about it, and then I can de-stress. That's kind of a stress management technique when there's so much to get done, but not the typical structures that remind me. And then sleeping. I'm really enjoying that it's been easier to get more sleep. And I think putting a lot of value on that, it can be kind of easy to end up on the internet or on movies and stuff with your brain space that is neither super productive nor super restful. And those are good things, but I don't think you should underrate the quality of sleep for de-stressing. So I highly recommend that.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see if any of us can develop some new helpful, healthy habits that maybe come out of this time. I know I've certainly enjoyed reconnecting with some people overseas. I have a friend in Italy that we just reconnected, so now we're having weekly Zoom meetings. So I think there's some really nice things that can come from this. So I encourage us all to continue thinking of ways to enrich our lives on a daily basis, whether we're inside or outside. So thank you, Beth, Kevin, Debra, and Sid. Thank you all for providing those tips, sharing your insight, and just talking a little bit about how you're looking at the next few days, weeks, and months ahead. And we all hope that this brief discussion has provided all of you with some tips and reassurance for continuing your professional growth during this time. We know you'll make good use of it and that you have a lot of support to do so. And to continue this conversation and ask some questions of everyone on our panel today, we invite you all to join the panelists next week on Tuesday, March 31st. At 11 to 12 for a live Zoom call. And Beth is going to show a couple slides and further information about that. So Beth, thank you.
Thanks, Erika. Let me just share my screen. Can you guys see that? First thing, I think probably a lot of us were doing this week, you know, first the apartment gets messier and then it gets cleaner before we feel like we can be productive. So I just needed to add that. And if you don't read PhD comics, the source of this, that's a good de-stress for for right now as well. And then in terms of planning your week, how your output might look from day to day can go up and down, but don't feel bad about that. Wanted to just show some of those resources that I mentioned in terms of learning R, learning different lab techniques. If you want to look up different protocols or think about your experiments a bit more, there's some links to some different ones that I recommended to my group. And then, as Erika said, we invite you just to find this link. You can go to the CBE website, bioengineering.ucsb.edu, and under events, you'll find this session, faculty panel for taking control of your quarter when the quarter feels so out of control. And just click on that Zoom link where that arrow is flashing at you. And that will take you into the live Zoom for Q&A next Tuesday. There we go. Back to you, Erika.
Great. Thank you, Beth. So thank you again, everyone. And from all of us here virtually, take care, everyone, in the meantime. And we look forward to talking with you next week. So until then, bye.
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 Thank you.